Hello everybody. My name is Ronald. I'm the co-founder of About Fraud, and I'm the host of this webinar today. Before we go into all the details and the speakers, I would like to inform everybody about our one and only housekeeping rule. Please be active and please ask questions and share your point of view. So on the right-hand side, all of you can see a chat box. There's a chat box and a Q&A box. So if you have a specific question, please use the Q&A box to share your question. And if you have any kind of general comments or statements, just go to the chat and share your perspective as well. Perfect. Then let's kick this off. Today we talk about an interesting topic, how to demystify online identities, and especially how to layer a good approach to this. Again, everybody knows there's no one bullet who can solve it all. So that's why we need to have a good toolbox to really kick out the fraudster. But let's have a look first who's with us today. So we have Karen, we have Stuart and Claire. And I would like that Karen, ladies first, starts with a short intro, and then Claire and Stuart as well.
Absolutely. Hello and good morning. My name is Karen Williams. I'm a Senior Director of Risk Strategy here at BILL, mainly focused on fraud risk. My time in risk is probably in the more junior area than everyone else, but in that time has been incredible. Everything from small startups to BILL to Stripe and across issuing, acquiring, and the payables space. And so seen a lot of fun things, excited to talk to you guys about it.
Welcome, Karen.
Thanks, Karen. Am I next, Ronald? I'll go.
Yeah, go next.
So my name is Blair Cohen. I'm the founder and president here at Authentic ID. I've been a fraud fighter for about 30 years now. So seen a lot over the past 30 years, but been focused specifically on identity for the past 10 years or so. So can't wait to share with everybody today what we're seeing, the creativity of these new fraudsters, and the trends moving forward.
Thanks, Blair. Thanks for being here. Stuart.
And good morning. My name is Stuart Levy. I'm the Vice President of Identity for TransUnion. I'm a relative rookie compared to Blair. I've only been doing this for about 18 years. I have a background in IT infrastructure, Sarbanes-Oxley, access controls, and identity verification, where I've been crafting government solutions primarily during that period of time, and have had affiliation with most of the large government programs requiring external identity verification.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for being here today. I mean, the audience can see we have a good packed team with a lot of experience. And again, please take any opportunity and challenge opinions, challenge statements, and ask your questions. So on the right-hand side, everybody can see a short layout of topics which we're trying to cover. We're trying to be as tangible as possible with our discussion today. But again, if you feel something is maybe seen from a different point of view, like you have, please share this. But let's start. I mean, today we want to talk about demystifying online identities and establishing trust for secure transactions and verifications. And I think it's maybe a good start for Blair as the most experienced in the room here to give us an overview about, I mean, what's going on? What are the trends? Is there anything what you have seen over the years? Is there any kind of new big thing on the rise where everybody should be aware of? Maybe that's a good starting point to set the stage and to have a solid foundation for a good discussion today. Blair.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for the honor of being the oldest guy in the room here and having the most experience, I guess. But yeah, I mean, over 30 years, as you can imagine, the trends, the techniques that have been used over the past 30 years have really remarkably changed. Historically, proving identity, proving that you are who you say you are, has revolved around releasing data. You would attest to your name, address, social security number, date of birth, And generally that worked. And in a higher risk situation, maybe we're going to ask you some out-of-wallet questions, some knowledge-based authentication questions that theoretically you're the only one that knows the answer to. What we've seen is that data no longer works. It's pretty easy to buy, it's pretty easy to steal, it's pretty easy to social engineer. So we've got to raise the bar a little bit for these fraudsters, and that's what Authentic ID does. So instead of, and my optics are very limited here. I'm sure that Karen and Stuart are going to have a much broader view of what's going on in the marketplace today. I'm going to talk strictly from my optics, and that's around fake identity documents and fake faces. And we've seen an exponential rise. In fact, I think I've got a slide here. Let me see if I can get it up. It is just crazy what's happened. So, last year we detected millions and millions and millions of counterfeit documents being used in every channel that you can imagine. Face-to-face was a lot of it. Believe it or not, they're bold enough to walk into a retail brick and mortar location and offer a fake ID because humans just don't have the capability to look at these sophisticated documents and know whether they're genuine or counterfeit or have been manipulated in any way. So far this year, we've seen a 52% increase over the millions of counterfeit IDs that we detected last year. It's really on the rise. That's a pretty dramatic increase. You can see the chart on the right that demonstrates that, the blue line being 2022, the orangish line being 2023. So every month it's been up and over even the highest month in 2022. So it's pretty alarming. We're seeing much more sophisticated attacks, very realistic identity documents that people are purchasing exact templates from the dark web. We've also seen a really large increase in the number of synthetic faces that are being presented, both as the selfie portion of the identity verification process, and generally that face, that synthetic face that's never existed, it's somebody that has never lived before, is pretty well stitched into the identity document as well. Stitched, blurred, spliced, there's lots of different techniques, but we're seeing a big increase in that regard. Can't wait to hear what Susan or what Stuart and Karen have seen.
Maybe a question to Karen. I mean, can you confirm this kind of trend from your side as well, that we talk about fake IDs a lot?
Yeah, I think definitely in the fake ID area, it's been interesting to watch that evolve over time too. From, maybe there's companies who don't have the power of this sort of intelligence, right? Instead, they just have someone send in an identity document or send in a selfie, and being able to kind of see that over time and how it's evolved and how important it is that there are companies that can really look at that and evolve with the fraudsters, especially with what is to come in the years ahead. So absolutely, they are getting more and more creative, and everything that we put in, they're right there to meet us at the field. So, yep.
But maybe a question, Karen. I mean, if you know that there's a big opportunity for fraudster with this kind of fake IDs to get in, is there at least a discussion to see, does it even make sense to have an ID uploaded if there's so many fake IDs around and there's so good nowadays, or is it still required and we adding different layers on top to verify the identity?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think if you have the right tech stack and you're keeping up with the fraudsters, this definitely still provides value, right? It's one more data point that you have, and it's a pretty powerful data point that you have, but you have to evolve with it, right? The days of just having an ID submitted and, to Blair's point, having a human take a look at it is not enough. Even a selfie picture that they send in is not enough. You really need that level of tech to be able to really tell the difference between the real and the fake, and keep investing in that to be ready for what's to come.
Cool. Stuart, any perspective from your side regarding trends? Can you confirm what you see here?
Yeah, so I would echo what Blair and Karen had to say. I would add to that and say that the fraudsters are pretty insistent that they are who they are purporting to be. And that's a little bit scary. I get involved with some of the fraud investigations that we look into, and we find individuals that are insistent that they are in fact the wrong person, And then we go and we're able to find the correct person that they're purporting to be living up the street or in the same neighborhood. And it's scary how insistent they are in the process.
Cool. I mean, not cool, but I mean, that's good to share to the audience. Claire already touched on this. I mean, technology plays quite a big part of this game. I mean, in the past, humans had the job in reviewing the IDs manually and trying to see, does it make sense? But nowadays, with the speed which we run and the sophistication of the fraudsters, technology is important. Maybe Claire, you can go into a bit more details to see how actually to use technology to stop a fraudster getting in the front of your door.
Yeah, it's pretty effective, Ronald, actually, and it's a very, very simple process. I think that we actually have a visual here somewhere. There we go. That can show everybody exactly how it works. So it's a very simple process. It doesn't really create that much friction like knowledge-based authentication. That takes 45 seconds, a minute. Most people can't end up answering those questions. So a lot of people end up very frustrated in the process. Whereas with this workflow, good people get through in just seconds and bad people get stopped in just seconds. We raised the bar pretty considerably. Instead of just stealing data from Ronald, now I've got to steal Ronald's real government issued ID. That's pretty hard to steal your government issued ID. I don't know about you, but I keep pretty careful control of my government issued ID. It'd be hard to steal mine, but I could drop it out of my pocket, leave it in a parking place or parking lot or something like that. But even then, it's pretty much worthless to a fraudster in our scenario, because you've got to be the one depicted on the document in order to pass this whole flow. So the way that it works is very simple. And we've optimized for user friction on this. Really, a user just needs to pull out their camera and point it in the direction of an ID. We'll sense that a document is there, and we support virtually all government-issued identity documents around the globe, and put the camera in video mode, start analyzing up to 120 frames a second. When we see the optimal frame with good lighting, good focus, we automatically snap for the user. So they're going to do the front and back, where there is a back with pertinent data. If you think of something like a passport, it's just the data page. There's no back page to that. So in that case, it's just one. But pretty simple, snap a front and back in a fully automated way. We're going to run about 500 different tests, 500 different algorithms that are going to determine whether that document is genuine, a counterfeit, or has been manipulated, digitally manipulated in some sort of shape or way. Then the person takes a quick selfie, which we match using very strong liveness detection. So I've talked a lot about synthetic faces and synthetic documents. We're going to stop that in this phase. So we're making sure that that person that's being depicted, that's taking a selfie of themselves, is a real person, that's really a live and natural person in that moment. So using very strong liveness detection, we match the person at the end of the transaction to the person depicted on the document. We also do something that's unique in the industry today, in that we maintain a bad actor fraud list, if you will. So every time that we scan an ID, we extract the data from that document as well as the face from that document. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen 200 different documents with the same face, all with different PII. So this broad shield technology stops that in its place. If we've seen you 10 minutes before and you were Stewart then and you're Blair now, we've got a huge problem with that. And the beautiful part about this whole workflow is a user only has to do this one time. Now that we know you're a good person, the next time that you interact with my entity, my enterprise, you can simply show your face. So with a great deal of confidence, I know for sure who's transacting, and then talk about an amazing user experience. It's as simple as opening up your iPhone to authenticate onto any website or any property.
I have one question, Claire. Potentially there are a range of companies who are saying, oh, that's interesting, but I'm wondering, which information do I receive back from you guys? of course, now we can see the user experience, but I'm as a company using your technology, do I get any kind of signals if it's good or bad? I mean, more than verified or not verified. So how much details do I receive as a fintech using your tech?
More than you probably want is the short answer to that question. We produced about 660 lines of JSON with every single transaction. So it's far beyond just doing a visual analysis of this document. We've run tons of data science, and the data that's on this document is also very pertinent. And running analysis on the data is highly effective at detecting fraud. If you think about a driver's license number, for example, on a document, that's an algorithm. That isn't a randomly generated sequence of numbers. There's an algorithm that was created to produce that sequence of numbers. And those kind of things exist throughout all identity documents. We also look at behavior. So the concept is when a real person goes through the process of imaging the real ID and the real face, they act in a very specific manner and pattern. So we use the sensors from the device, accelerometer, gyroscope, compass, all those kind of things, to see if a person's going through the process acting like a normal human, if they're acting in a suspicious manner. I know I'm being a little bit cagey here on what happens there, but I'll give you one example. If, for example, when you were prompted to take a selfie, you were to use the rear camera on the device, that's kind of anomalous behavior. You're probably not taking a picture of your face. You're trying to take a picture of somebody else's face. But the amount of detail, Ronald, is very deep. So we show you all these different bookshelves of algorithms. So from a visual standpoint, we have hundreds of different algorithms, and we'll show you exactly which one triggered in the analysis. But in the end, it's not a confidence score. It really is binary. Is that document real? Is the person really the person depicted on it? Or is the person a spoof? Are they not the person depicted on it? Is the document a counterfeit? Has the document been manipulated in any way, shape, or form? So generally it's good or bad. There are scenarios where we kind of think it's probably a fake document, but we want to give that user one more chance. So that may end up in a recapture mode. So we want them to take another photo to give us another chance to look at that area of detail and get them off that fence from a recapture, So we don't come out with an undecided outcome, if you will.
Maybe a question to Karen. Would you care about all these details, or is for you enough, okay, verified, not verified?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and it was exciting to hear that you have all those data points, right? Because I think it depends on potentially the scale or size of the company and where they're at in their journey, right? Oh. Some want the simplicity. I just need a yes or no. I need the integration to be fully there. And as a company evolves, they might want that data. They might use it in other elements of their machine learning, right? And so I think being able to have that flexibility is a really cool component to it.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good point for Stuart. I mean, we talked about a layered approach, and we also have a life cycle of a customer. So we're talking now here in this kind of example about an onboarding flow, but later we have potentially a login process. We have a transaction, changing of details, or more transactions or other activities. Maybe Stuart can point out from his, let's say, perspective, how does it work together, having a layered approach across a life cycle of a customer, which can have plenty of steps?
Yeah, I think for years where we watched data breaches simply escalate. I think the Identity Theft Resource Center said that this year they've already seen a 14% increase in the number of data breaches this year. So we continue to accelerate and have no expectation of privacy there. And we've been for a long time talking about applying a layered approach. I think there's been a little bit of a misconception in the application of layered approaches. I think that's been received as throw everything in the utility belt at the problem all at once. And that's clearly not the intention. The user flow and the login flow or other registration flows have different risks and different requirements along the way. And each element has their own costs. So we look for cost avoidant schemes strategies that allow us to dig deep and spend the money on more expensive strategies where there is risk, and then have lesser friction, lesser expense when the risk is not justified. And then we apply that same strategy to these other kinds of flows. I just simply categorize them all as critical changes. So when you change a password, when you change an address, when you change a bank account number, there are certain critical changes that require coverage. Each of them requires its own unique strategy given the risk, where we're looking at different signals along the way rather than everything all at the same time. Can't do it.
I just want to pick a few questions from the audience before we going into some more details. I think there's a good question from Jessica. Do we have a sense of numbers that increase? Larry mentioned before that we have more generated fake selfies. So is there any kind of number which you can share? And I'm also interested on the global scale. Is there any kind of ID more risky than another ID, or do you think that's happening around the world, or is there any kind of market more active in creating good faked documents?
Boy, that was a bunch of questions in one. Let me try to tackle them in reverse order here. So it's kind of hard to know exactly where these things are being produced. The really good quality fakes that we see out there are purchased on the dark web. And as you can imagine, those people obfuscate their location and details quite well. In terms of where is there a difference in documents and our ability to authenticate those? Absolutely. You'll see, in order to produce a high quality identity document, like Stuart was referring to earlier, it's a layered approach, and you have to put in more security features to stop those things from being counterfeited. And a lot of governments around the world just haven't invested. So you take, for example, in India, most people don't really carry their plastic identity card anymore because you've got a national identity system there. So they carry a piece of paper that in some cases is laminated, in some cases it's not. We also see this in Brazil, in the Brazilian RG card. It's literally a piece of paper. So with us, we're doing a forensic analysis of an identity document. There's not a lot of forensic analysis you can perform on a piece of paper that's been printed on black and white. That would be exceptionally easy to counterfeit, and I'm not certain that even our brilliant researchers have an answer for that. Whereas in the US, most states, there are a couple of exceptions, I won't name them, but most states have invested pretty heavily in a wide variety of different security features and production capabilities. There are as many as 35 different security features that are available on identity documents around the globe. Some of these things cost dollars per document. So it starts to add up when you've got a huge population. So absolutely, it varies by jurisdiction. And what was the last question there, Ronald? I thought there were three.
I think we covered a big part, and I think that's good. And I just want to pick one more before we're moving on. I think one question came in this process. How would you switch between a web interface and the mobile environment? Maybe that also goes into the life cycle and different steps. So if someone is signing up for any kind of solution, needs to enroll, does it on his Mac or any kind of computer, and now you ask, please take a photo. Do you need to download an app, or was it just like a link? Or I guess there are plenty of different ways of doing it, but maybe you can share the best practice, how companies implementing this nowadays.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. And, it really depends on what you're considering a laptop. So many laptops these days have very sophisticated contemporary cameras. If you look at the latest Microsoft Surface Pros, they've got very strong, sophisticated high-def cameras in those things. I personally work on an iPad most all the time. Again, very strong, sophisticated camera. If you go to a MacBook, it's not just the amount of fidelity that you lose in that front-facing camera. It's also got to do with user experience. Those things are really designed for this kind of session, a Skype session where I've got this long focal distance between the camera sensor and my face. When you start trying to hold up a document directly to the camera, they really have a hard time focusing. So it's more about user experience, but there is something there when it comes to resolution as well. As I mentioned earlier, we're doing a forensic analysis on these documents. We're looking at things that the human eye can't see. In order for our computer vision and AI to be able to see these features that the human can't see, we need to have pretty strong resolution. We're looking at 450 DPI as a basic minimum. So, but anyway, the handoff, as you mentioned, Ronald, can happen very simply. It's either going to be via an email or a text to move you to a contemporary device that has a more sophisticated camera to allow you to capture that really good quality image the first time around.
Cool. Before we going into the next, let's say, section, I would like to start a poll for the audience, and that then will lead to the next question to Karen. So I'm starting the poll for everybody. Maybe everybody can look at this right now and just going through. And you can choose as many options as you want. So again, here the question is, what authentication layers in your business are currently used to fight fraud? And that then actually goes to the question to Karen. Again, we have here already in this poll a whole range of different methods, different potential technology. So from your point, Karen, from your experience, is there any kind of emerging trend or technology which you believe could make a difference, or the kind of combination? Maybe you can share your thoughts, and then we can see what the audience think about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, and we said it earlier, there is no right or wrong to tech stacks, right? But I would say what is important to me when I think about this is that you have to have a mix of information and presence. And as Stuart called out, right, the information is becoming less and less reliable. So many fraudsters have access to that. And so anywhere that you can get presence indicators is really critical. And I think this identity document is a good example of that, right? Like, this technology has developed so much over the last 10 years and will be facing kind of an incoming fraud pressure, I would say, with fraudsters and AI and everything else in the future. So if we weren't in this position that we are today of having options, I think we wouldn't be prepared for what is to come. So I think this piece is really important, and it's an important part of the tech stack. Outside of that, I think the other one that has caught my attention, I guess I was surprised by in some regards, how much fraud is interconnected across the ecosystem. Like, I've spent time in different areas, but also in talking to competitors and people who are in the same space. Fraudsters will literally reuse their attack strategy from one company to the next. And so one that's gotten me excited lately is the idea of consortiums, right? Being able to share information, because if the fraudster is attacking me, the fraudster is attacking you. And I still think this goes back as one example, Blair, of the idea of your kind of that denial list that you have, right? Being able to see it across everyone. And I think there's more and more opportunities like that are out there of kind of these broader consortiums, so we can get ahead of the fraudsters. Because to me, fraudsters, I think one thing that surprised me is the rise, or maybe evolution of organized crime, right? They are organizing. It's not some lone wolf in a basement anymore. Maybe it never was, right? But they are organizing, and we have to organize to get ahead of that. So these consortiums and being able to share data, which is hard, right? You have to get your own data right first. You have to align on a terminology. You have to label your data, and then you have to align on that with other companies, is really hard, and hard to do it securely. But it's something that I think is particularly interesting to me lately.
I mean, in general, from my point of view, that is a big benefit of using many third-party providers. That's actually having a good scope about what's going on in the market and using the information in one way or the other to provide value to the customers, to the consortium. And again, there are a lot of initiatives in the US and in many parts of the world where they're actually trying to get data together. But as already pointed out, Karen, in some cases, a fraud case could be a fraud case. In some other maybe perspective is not a fraud case, or what is really a validated fraud scenario of fraud data, which is sometimes a bit tricky. And I just want to go back to one question before we go into the poll results, because there's an interesting question from Kevin, which actually asked about privacy. And when we go back to the consortium data, of course, that is linked to it. But as Claire mentioned before, he's scanning the face of Ronald. Now he knows Ronald is a bad actor. If he comes again, he knows that maybe Ronald will try it somewhere else. But how is this compliant player around the world, or especially when we go back to this question in Canada? So is there any kind of restrictions that you save the data or using the data?
Oh my goodness. There are so many restrictions, Ronald. I don't even know where to begin. And I was listening to a webinar the other day. I think there are 174 active new pieces of legislation concerning consumer privacy going on around the globe right now today. This was, information as fresh as last Wednesday. So it presents a tremendous problem and tremendous challenge. I actually have a slide that'll kind of illustrate this a little bit. So we've been trying to get this consortium concept together for so long, Karen. We've seen this happen. We've seen people go. For people that don't know, we do most of the telecommunications companies in North America, and we will see a fraudster go from a Sprint store to a Verizon store to an AT&T store, all in the same shopping center, with this unusual velocity. But due to privacy constraints and the other challenges that you mentioned around labeling and then level setting on what those labels mean, as you mentioned, one company may label something as fraud, the other may label it as bad debt. Same exact behavior, but two different outcomes here. So this is also a challenge. It's not just the privacy rules, but how do we standardize on language and best practices here? But if you could, here's an example of what could happen just in the telco industry last year or so far this year. I mean, 647,000 fake IDs in a very small vertical industry. It says 1,000 a day here. If you do the math, it's close to 2,000 a day. And so far, we're looking at $2.9 billion that potentially could have been saved had these companies collaborated and worked together, whereas the fraudsters are collaborating and working against us all day long, every day.
I mean, what can we say? I mean, we understand there's a big meaning behind of working together. I mean, that's why we attending conferences, we're doing webinars, we're having any kind of smaller setups to share information, discussing and brainstorming. But of course, the big point is the data. But maybe that's a good question to Stuart. I mean, data is a big asset. And we learned before, data is available everywhere. You can buy it. It's data breaches. You can buy it in the dark web. But still, everybody believes, or the majority believes, that data enrichment is quite an important point for reviewing an onboarding process, reviewing a transaction, or getting just a better understanding about an identity. Maybe, Stuart, you can provide from your perspective, how important is data enrichment today? And do we still do data enrichment down the road if we know that data is actually available from left to right?
Right. Sure. Thank you for that. So there's probably a couple of things there. So actually data enrichment is a turn of phrase that is used within our circles to refer to inferential data that's created on behalf of a consumer transaction that we created on behalf of our customer transaction. Where we're permitted to, we use those so that we can follow consumers and their unique identifiers across various customer profiles, across different customers that are using the same platform. They might show up with a certain ID in one place and a different one in another place. So to Blair's point, it's quite informational to have enrichment for that purpose, to look at an ID and the way that it's presented differently at different places. And the same thing with devices. We create a unique, and it's an enriched device ID. And its purpose is to look at a device, track it across its life cycle. Even if you change the browser, change the operating system, you still need to know that a device was associated to prior committed fraud. And we have a consortium, I think we have 40,000 brands, about 35 to 40 million transactions per day that are looking at these transactions with actual fraud investigators that are assigning fraud to those specific device identifiers. So that would be like one level of data enrichment. Another level of data enrichment, I think you're more referring to possibly, is about using the availability of data to ascertain whether or not what somebody is saying is true. So for sure, a person's PII is largely publicly available. They can go to the dark web and they can just buy that. But what is not available, where we can enrich that perspective, is the velocity and the behavior of that individual that's behind the identity. And I think that's where there's really value. We only use the readily available PII, name, address, date of birth, SSN, to look that person up in our system, ascertain whether or not that's a real live person. And if so, what are the risk signals that we can associate to that individual? And that's where you were asking before about advancements and innovations. And I think something that was possibly the only positive thing that came out of the pandemic was improved machine learning and looking at the association of various signals to not just prevent the fraud, but allow the good guys to gain access to government services, in my case, or financial services in Karen's case. And I think that was very helpful.
I think you mentioned an interesting point, which I didn't maybe had in mind before, the velocity. I think that's a good point. I mean, you see a lot of transactions on a daily basis, so you have a good understanding about how certain data points behaving or how certain identities behaving. So would you, again, my question is always very actionable. So if I'm a fintech using your data, would you just tell me, is risky, less risky? Would you give me a score, or would you also give me details? Hey, we have seen this identity from Ronald or specific data points today already so often, and we believe based on the velocity of this data, this is like extremely high risk. So how much you actually share back to the company? Like Karen mentioned before, if you're getting more advanced, you want to get all this data because you want to use this in your own machine learning models. So that's why for some companies, it could be interesting to really understand, what do I get back or what do I receive?
Right. So we have a very verbose API. We've been developing that over a long period of time. Some customers do want all of the metadata and all of the raw information so they can apply their own machine learning strategies. Most customers prefer to get the machine learning result or the analytic result. An example of that is synthetic identity fraud. Synthetic identity fraud, I think, has made a lot of noise in the industry. I'm sure Karen sees this a good bit. But today, it makes up far less than 1% of all identity fraud. The most common form of identity fraud that I see in the government space is friendly fraud. People simply trying to help other people go get information that they need and go get benefits that they need. So what we supply the telemetry that the customer system is able to receive and make use of, and we'll calibrate that telemetry across experiences there and a large transaction volume with the system operating in production to revisit the way that it's performing and tune that up to be a little bit better. But it's pretty critical that with the consortium that we have in place, we have outcomes, and that we can train the system to understand the outcome and the telemetry that led to negative outcomes to prevent that in the future.
Cool. I think Claire touched before on a few keywords. We talked about customer experience. And when we look about the industry, there's always like do I want to have friction, no friction, less friction, more friction for bad people, less friction for good people? I mean, there's a certain trend that we want to have no passwords, one click. I mean, all these buzzwords around. But I think there's a certain threshold where we can go, where we should go. And maybe that's a good point here to have an opinion or different perspectives here. Is there really no friction wanted from the industry, or is this more that we as tech providers want to provide always one step more as our customers / banks, fintechs expect? Or how's the world moving, Blair? I mean, maybe you can share some thoughts from your point.
Goodness. So it's a big topic of debate out there. There are so many signals that you can get. So, for example, we talked about smart friction or smart risk appetite Stuart did earlier. I mean, if you know that a bot is attacking you, why do anything? Why throw any of these identity prevention measures at it? But I see perceptions changing, Ronald. I think in the past, the concept of making somebody take a picture of their ID and take a picture of their face was just like, no, that's too much. We're asking the consumer to do way too much. But the reality is that it can dramatically speed up every transaction if you were to put it at the front. Today, because this perception is that this is too much and it's going to create this friction, it's going to create abandonment. People don't generally put it up front. But let me talk about some of the benefits. So today, somebody has to fill out a form, right? If you're going to become a new customer of anybody, I've got to give you a lot of detail. I've got to type all that detail into some sort of a form. Generally, when that happens, it takes some time, and a lot of times mistakes happen. By simply taking a photo of your ID, we, in seconds, extract all the data from that document 100% accurately and can fill that form. So, if you look at manually filling out a form, it takes 1.5 minutes. Our process takes 15 seconds. We get it right the first time, every time. There are some advantages, but I don't dispute the fact that, certainly our customers are looking for lower friction. They want to get more consumers through the funnel as quickly as possible with the least amount of money as possible. So they are looking at lower friction ways of doing that. We're oftentimes used in a very high risk scenario. In fact, we've got a scenario with TU today with a mutual customer where we're the last thing in the flow. This person has failed every single authentication method that's been put in front of them. So it's very likely a fraudster. We're the last one in the flow in that regard. So, I think there's this concept of smart friction. At this point, it makes a lot of sense to put this user that's failed every other authentication method through a few more hoops before you let them in the front door.
The other point is we also have to keep in mind every step costs money on one hand side.
Yeah.
And also potentially if you stop someone, depends on the business, at the first step, maybe they recognize, oh, maybe ID was not that good. I will just try another ID. So that's also what I've seen in some discussions. So you might want to give some way, even if you know this is a fraudster. So you're actually creating more effort for someone going through the process, but maybe you're not going to finalize the process. Or you might having a different way how you're treating a bad one instead of just rejecting. Maybe that's also, again, depends on the business, but there are different ways. Even if you know this is a bad customer, maybe not rejecting, but maybe giving limited access or giving some bad score or something to maybe not giving a fully product. Maybe Karen can give some perspective here, how you dealing with friction and how you dealing with bad customers. Do you just decline them or do you give them maybe a bad experience that they just drop sooner or later?
Probably depends on whether or not I've had my coffee and whether or not I want to toy with the fraudster or not. No, just kidding. But on the frictionless side, I do think that this is potentially a very heated topic, especially depending on the size of the company, where they're at in their journey, their understanding of risk, right? And so I think being able to navigate this conversation is really important for us as risk professionals, right? And in some cases, it's about how you sell it. Blair, I love what you said there of like, let's say a smaller startup that's new, just using an example, might want to have zero information collected, right? It's just too much. And being able to instead say, well, you're going to invest in all these technologies to auto look up the address and they're going to spend all this time doing the form. What if you actually had the document and you're pulling information out? And so I think it's about really selling sometimes like the value add that is there from the customer experience to do it a different way, I think is a really important piece for fraud professionals to be able to navigate when they're working with product teams and trying to advocate for controls that we need and where we need to apply smart friction. The other one that comes out for me is obviously we should be aiming for some amount of frictionless experience, right? How much data can we get behind the scenes to create a green path for a majority of customers? But where you need that friction, right, where you have to have that, being able to measure it, because Ronald, you said at the beginning there, like, folks want passwordless. We don't want to have to enter an MFA. We might reject a user. We might ask for a document. Those frictions are not all equal, right? They're not all equal in impact. They're not all equal in frequency. So being able to measure the user pain of where you're causing friction, I think is an important piece of creating a storyline that product can really navigate around. And then the last one, and then this goes back to something you said, Blair, like you have to be tenacious about that experience, whatever type of friction you're adding, right? And I think that's where a lot of companies go wrong is that you're right. Back in the day where I had to like try to take a picture, and hold my ID up to my computer and I had to email it and I'm not comfortable with emailing it, right? That was a very frictionful experience. But if you can make your risk experiences intuitive and easy, and if as a company we invest in that, then not all friction has to be bad friction. So anyways, those are just some thoughts that I have on that area of it.
I'll just pile on one last thought on that. I honestly think consumers appreciate the friction. They want to know that their accounts are safe and secure and protected. And when they see a real person going through some hurdles to get into their own account, they know that those hurdles are going to be very difficult for a bad actor or fraudster, somebody that's not them, to jump through. So, while it may be a little bit painful, in the end, most of what we see is consumers appreciate that pain.
But maybe if I would be a fraudster and I think, okay, the onboarding process is now very solid, maybe the fraudster will move into account takeovers because they know now, okay, maybe I need to spend so much time and effort going through the onboarding process. But if someone's already validated, maybe it's even better to avoid all the headache with the onboarding. I'm now just trying to do a phishing attack or something similar to get passwords and taking over the account. And actually, that's a good point when we're going back to our poll. So I hope you remember we did a poll a few minutes back. And the top rated answer is the MFA. So Karen just mentioned, we don't want to have an MFA, it's too complicated, etc. But if you're looking back at the audience from this webinar today, MFA with 21% is the highest rated answer. The number 2 is real-time monitoring of transactions and activities, and risk scoring using digital insights like device data and IP. So these are the most ranked answers here. Just checking some questions.
They all three rank pretty well, with the exception of MFA, which has come under a lot of scrutiny. But regardless, all three of those are valid.
Yeah. I mean, maybe also trying to recap. I mean, we talked about different areas. And again, fraudsters will not disappear tomorrow. And there's no golden bullet which will solve it all. And we know we need a layered approach. But if you're looking about ahead, so now we have end of 23, we're going to next year, we see numbers are rising. Is there anything what you would recommend? Maybe let's start with Stuart. So if someone in his audience is watching this webinar today and they should take something back and then discussing this next week in the team meeting with the experts, is there anything that you could recommend that they should talk about next week and maybe trying to identify what are low-hanging fruits or KPIs or data which they might miss so far and maybe should look at to see if you're doing the right things or if you're missing something?
Yeah, I see most frequently customers forget or take a short circuit on the risk management process that precedes all the product development. They don't have a solid understanding and they're not able to quantify the impacts of getting the process wrong. So I think going through a solid risk management process is the takeaway that I would think through, and applying the friction where you need to have the friction and using that in the right way with the right telemetry, quantify that to then improve performance over time, managing it like an actual product.
I have maybe one thought about this. I was attending last week an event in Europe, and one regulator, and it was quite interesting. They pointed out from a regulator point of view that they see two risks. It's not about having no solution. It's about having a wrong implementation and not maintaining the systems in the right way. That's what was some interesting points, because some people believe, okay, I'm implementing now a new model, I'm implementing now a solution and done, and no fraudster comes in anymore. But that's not the reality. And that's why I really had a good discussion with this lady afterwards to see, even if the regulator already sees this, that it's not having no solution, but really how is it implemented, how is the journey, and also how is it maintained over time. I think that was an interesting perspective. But maybe to Claire, from your side, is there any low-hanging fruit which we can give to the audience where they could actually make an impact this year instead of running through a long process and doing many changes?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I'm very biased here, but put document authentication into your tech stack. Having people review these things makes zero sense. I'm an expert at this. I've been doing it for 10 years, and I'm probably about a coin flip in accuracy. If you were to put 100 fake IDs or a mix of counterfeit and genuine IDs in front of me, I'm going to get it right about half the time. I don't think people can do it reliably. I certainly don't think people can defend against sophisticated synthetic faces reliably. It's something humans are very poor at. So put some technology in place and protect yourself. A simple fake ID and synthetic face will bypass most security systems that are in place today, especially from an account takeover standpoint. I mean, I could become you, Ronald, and take over your account pretty effectively with simply a fake ID and doing a little bit of research on you.
Sure, that's easy nowadays. I mean, I share a lot, hopefully not the important information, but I mean, there's a lot of information out there. But maybe one question from the audience, from Deanna to you, Claire. She said, we have asked for utility bills for the member address, and that's also doctored up a lot. So do you see any kind of comparison between fake identities and fake documents like a utility bill or something similar?
Yeah, I mean, they go hand in hand. In Europe, to open up an account, there's a 2-document requirement. You can't just create a fake ID. You have to create fake utility bills as well. So they go hand in hand, no doubt about it. And unfortunately, the confidence that you can have doing an analysis on a utility bill is much lower than the confidence you can have on an identity document that has dozens of security features, dozens of different ways in which they embed and come up with the data that's on these documents. So that's a difficult challenge, the detection of any sort of A4 type of document that's theoretically to prove residence. Big challenge.
Yeah. Karen, from your side, any thoughts? But also, I would like to embed one question. Did you ever looked about blockchain technology? We got one question in. Is there anything on your roadmap to look into blockchain more? Is there any kind of other technology which you believe could be useful? Or is there anything, like my initial question, what you can give back to the audience as a kind of low-hanging fruit or advice? Or is it something you might have seen the last 6 months which you did not really recognize as important the last years?
Yeah, on the blockchain front, it has not been top on my radar to look at. So maybe one of our other folks might have some inputs there. On the kind of parting words to go back to the teams, I think honestly it's going to seem too simple, but asking that question, what is our layered approach? Do we have a layered approach? Where are our risk checkpoints? And where do we have opportunity to think creatively about where we put the friction that we're going to have, right? I think it all starts there, and it's not a one size fits all for any particular company, right? So you have to start by, in your team meetings, asking those questions, documenting it, finding and measuring where you have user friction, and is it worth the trade-off? And then thinking creatively, kind of to Blair's point, about should we completely rethink how we do some element of this? Could it help us in a different way? I think would be where I would encourage to start.
Maybe also we can open a challenge for player. Ask him to challenge the 100 documents and see if he identifies the fakes. Maybe that's a challenge.
I'll do my best, folks. I'll do my best. Send me the documents so we could use them.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also important, like we mentioned it now a few times, reflecting what you're doing. And often is really challenging about your infrastructure, challenging the process, challenging the data. And maybe it's good to use this kind of challenge to see, okay, what do I do today? Is this really the edge or not? Or is there anyone out there who can actually improve my process, improving the customer experience and stopping with fraudsters? We're running close to the hour, so that's why I just want to give a last round to Blair, Stuart, and Karen. Is there anything what we should round this up? Again, layout is important. Everybody talks about this, but sometimes easier to talk about this than really implementing, especially the roadmaps are packed, limited resources, so it's not always easy to get on. Maybe Karen first, Blair, Stuart, to round this up for today.
Oh, darn. Yeah, I think just echoing your point there that everybody is facing tight roadmaps, right? Trade-offs, frictions. And so if you are a risk professional in this, you're not alone, right? Everybody's weighing that. And there is no one right solution. I think leveraging the data that you have, letting it guide you in your decisions is really important. And where you need help or you need resources, right? There are lots of different vendors out there who can take a piece of the problem for you, and that way you can decide, to Stuart's point, where to go deep and where to kind of let off the pressure in certain areas. So yeah.
Thanks,
For all you CFOs out there, during tough times, we historically see fraud really dramatically rise. So unleash your checkbooks and give Karen all the money she needs in order to fight this stuff now, or you're going to feel it next year.
Good point. Stuart.
I guess I can comment on the blockchain piece. I think that's a solid venue to think about privacy enhancing security. It always cracks me up when I see blockchain used in the same context of an identity management discussion, with the anonymity of blockchain, identity management relying on the opposite of that. But that's a great venue to execute privacy and package experiences associated to that identity. That's not necessarily a release to everybody, but is available to the nodes that have access to that information, and then can prove reliability on that. So, yep.
And also we can see countries like Brazil and others who are actually starting very active in using blockchain technology to play around and gaining experience. And we always learned if you're doing something new, the rules going to be adapted as we play the game. But I think it's always exciting to see new games and see how they improving our life as good people and making the life harder for the fraudsters. But again, I'm very pleased that I had a great panel today. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Blair. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks to the audience for all the questions. We did not get to all the questions, but I'm sure the team will look at this and see if we can come back to you with some more details. Perfect. Then thanks a lot for being here today.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Ronald.
Bye.